The green to AFD pipeline is a very real thing, as confusing as it might sound to a lot of people. Actually, you know what? I can get started on the theory segment right now because that's not something I like really need a source for. I can refer back to the tweet that mentioned it if I need to, but really it's like it's just a talking head kind of thing rather than like a strictly news segment. So a lot of something that people have brought up as of late, especially as the AFD is gaining a lot of ground in Germany, and as people seem to be defecting to the far right en masse, is that the demographic of people who are defecting to the far right are not necessarily that which you would expect. That being young people predominantly in the country of Germany, as well as former
green
voters. Also, don't throw green shells back at the line, you fucking dickhead. The green to AFD pipeline is a very real thing, as confusing as it might sound to a lot of people. Some people have mentioned the sort of hippie to Nazi pipeline. That is a component part of this. But there's one thing that I want to hammer in on first, right? And that is the consequence of greenwashing capitalism, right? The only reason that an environmentalist to fascist or environmentalist to Nazi pipeline exists, the reason that such a pipeline exists is because the like socially and politically accepted forms of environmentalism right now are ones that do not threaten the basis of private capital and the sort of property relations that currently exist, the existing social order. In order to have meaningful redress of environmental issues, in order to effectively manage the consequences of climate change, to truly minimize the amount of damage that can do to society and sort of create a more sustainable set of structures that can, well, not cause the same crisis again, you have to get rid of capitalism. You have to address the root causes of things that drive climate change in the first place. For example, the fossil fuel industry, the sort of incentives for people to rely on very quick and dirty sources of energy because quarterly profits are all that they care about. Fundamentally, that is at the core of the current climate crisis, you know? The hold which certain industries have over various countries, and the fact that, like, said industries are governed by people whose only concerns is what gets them the biggest profit in the shortest amount of time. Long-term consequences be damned, right? If you have a form of environmentalism that doesn't challenge that, then what you have is not real environmentalism. Now, you might still be asking, okay, so environmental capitalism doesn't fix the climate crisis, but how does that lead to fascism? How does that lead to Nazism? Well, that comes in the form of some shared reactionary tendencies between those two movements. The talking points, for example, that, oh, humans are the problem. Very Malthusian tendencies that a not necessarily anti-capitalist environmentalist movement would have. A lot of environmentalist talking points that are compatible with capitalism, that are compatible with a liberal capitalist world order, you know, neoliberalism, eventually and necessarily lead to Malthusian talking points about depopulation and the worst kinds of like eco-authoritarianism and eco-fascism that, while they would theoretically stop the climate crisis from getting any worse, would maintain the existing set of property relations that are massively exploitative and, like I said, created the crisis in the first place. You know? And for those who are not familiar, you guys, like, people probably know that Malthusianism and, like, Malthusian economics and whatever relies on narratives of depopulation a lot. Specifically, what Thomas Malthus supported in addressing the sort of climate crisis, which he viewed solely in terms of overpopulation, was he wanted to mass exterminate poor people. Every not anti-capitalist like form of environmentalism eventually just leads to killing poor people in very large numbers, right? Or allowing poor people to die in droves, because that is like that's the only thing that could address the climate crisis, short of challenging the existing property relations. An alternative which, like, if you do challenge those property relations, people don't really need to die over that. Crazy concept, I know. Okay, I finally learned how to do that. I think a lot of people, these green movements push people away because of this. They blame the people, not the corporations. Yes, thank you. That's exactly it. Very simple encapsulation of how green movements lead into fascism when they are not anti-capitalist is because they blame people, not corporations. And what are most people? Poor. You know, it completely misses out on the fact that the almost entirety of emissions are caused either by the necessity of consumption of certain, like, economically unsustainable and, like, ecologically unsustainable forms of fuel. You know, poor people have no choice but to engage with that. And the fact that rich people do have a choice to change that because they have a degree of power, but choose not to. Refer back to the memes about rich people flying private jets everywhere and the, like, the top 1% being massively disproportionately responsible for all the emissions that we see on planet Earth, right? So you have the green movements that blame people and not corporations, and of course blaming people rather than corporations, and, well, a class of economic elite that has perpetuated this crisis to begin with, and a system that has perpetuated this crisis, created this crisis through perverse incentives that incentivize unsustainable production and massively inefficient production, very wasteful production. Through avoiding blaming any of the systemic and powerful factors that actually are to blame, you inherently lean towards blaming the most vulnerable, painting the poor, the migrant, and the minority as the scapegoat. And this is how you achieve a synthesis between greenwashing capitalism and Nazism, or fascism more broadly. If that makes sense. But now with that, I can actually get back to the role that that sort of hippies play in all of this, because in addition to the ignorance of the role of wealthy people and the systems that create such inequalities that people can have such wealth in the first place, there also becomes a degree of anti-materialism and lack of critical thinking, reactionism, and sort of spiritualism, such as the conundrum with hippies. Hippies are very, like, you know, like the flower children stereotypes and like spiritual, haha, flowers, peace sign, whatever, all that sort of crap. You know, the hippie movement was very much like New Age spiritualist, and that sort of eccentric tendency, or esotericism rather, that sort of spiritual esotericism is itself a form of fascism. Hippies already are latently fascist because they have a spiritually deterministic worldview, and because they are like very anti-materialist in their political leanings. Despite their seeming liberalism, this will reliably and always lead to fascism. And that is how, through those pre-existing ideological tendencies, as well as the economic alienation that leads people to be frustrated with more mainstream elements such as the existing green movement, that is how you get a green to AFD or a green to fascist pipeline. Yeah, the politicians and activists flying in private jets to decide how best to blame people heating their homes and riding cars to work as the problem is so fucking ironic. Yes, although I would make a slight amendment to that statement. Activists are not the people flying in private jets. They don't have that kind of money. Lobbyists, though, they are. Actually, people would start disagreeing on former ideological groups fight and eventually decision have a group zone, B group zone, controlled by these groups. because you're imagining that anarchy means there is no complex society. Look, I'm gonna resist the urge to get derailed on another one of those conversations. I think it's important to remember that because a lot of young people, like people my age, people of my generation or younger, name climate change as one of the #1 issues that face the world today. And when that is like going to be the heart of the discourse, more and more so as the climate crisis gets more and more severe, as sea levels rise, etc., we need to have a more critical understanding of where this discourse will lead. And the fact of the matter is, if you don't take this discourse in an overtly anti-capitalist direction, it is going to lead to Malthusianism, fascism, and the sort of like depopulationist narratives that will necessarily be directed at the most vulnerable, you know, like I said, the minorities and the poor. Again, I'm going to resist the urge to derail just for a second to say future me, that theory segment about green to fascist pipeline, cut it there. You know what to do in the editing. Thanks for watching, and support the channel if you would be so kind.